Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when dinner came with no fries, no sauces, and definitely no dessert menu. You're standing barefoot on dusty soil, clutching a wooden bowl full of something grayish and wet. That's not mashed potatoes, by the way, that's corn mush. And no, it's not seasoned. Because guess what? The salt ran out 3 weeks ago. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is, especially if you're up past your bedtime. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a sleepy colonial village in the 1600s. Jamestown, Virginia. Everything smells faintly of smoke, damp hay, and something simmering that might be rabbit stew or might be disappointment. Colonial cuisine is not exactly food blogger material. Most of the meals are, let's be honest, repetitive and beige. You don't eat because it's delicious. You eat because otherwise you'll die of dysentery before winter even says hi. Let's start with corn or maize. As the locals read, the Powhatan people who've actually been living here for thousands of years know it. This is the crop that literally saves your hungry colonial skin. Corn mush for breakfast, cornbread for lunch, corn cakes for dinner. You dream in yellow. Historians still argue whether the early settlers were even capable of feeding themselves without indigenous help. Some sources say colonists refused native food at first, thinking it too savage. Others say they embraced it as soon as the chill of their first New England winter slapped them across the face like a frozen fish. And salt. Oh, salt. You dream about it. You fantasize about flakes of it, maybe sprinkled on your one hard-boiled egg, if you were lucky enough to find a hen that hadn't wandered into a foxhole. Salt isn't just a seasoning. It's how you keep meat from going funky before you can even pronounce refrigeration. But colonial salt is imported from across the ocean, which means every sprinkle comes with a whisper of shipping delays and moldy barrels. Meat is tricky. You might have some dried fish, or if you're fancy, a squirrel, roasted, maybe even on a spit. There's a fringe record of colonists boiling eels in seawater, then fermenting them into a kind of sticky jerky. Is that dinner or a punishment? You're not sure. There's an open scholarly debate over whether communal dining helped unify colonies or caused more food fights than family bonding. One thing's for sure. Everyone ate together, and everyone judged what was in your bowl. Not for taste, but for survival odds. If your stew looked watery, people assumed your hunting skills were just as thin. Spices? Let's not get crazy. Pepper is a luxury, and nutmeg might as well be a unicorn horn. Most flavor came from what you could grow, and even then, it's not like basil was chilling in little pots on every windowsill. You'd get wild onions, maybe a bitter herb or two, and occasionally, if you were truly blessed, some imported molasses from the West Indies. Molasses, by the way, becomes the Beyoncé of colonial sweetness. You can stir it into porridge, bake it into gritty gingerbread, or just lick it off a wooden spoon and pretend you're at a tavern in Boston living the high life. But be warned, it sticks to everything, including your teeth, which you won't have for long anyway. As you slump beside the hearth, the smoky air thick with something bubbling in a pot, a rat scampers across the floor. You name him Thomas. He's your only real friend now. There's a diary, half-burned and barely legible, that talks about a family who roasted pumpkin without sugar, just scraping it into a kind of fibrous mash. Was it good? Probably not. Did it keep them alive? Sort of. Until that one icy November when the cellar flooded and all the pickles floated away. Fringe detail for you. Some colonists ground up dried watermelon seeds into a powder and used it like flour. Was this a culinary innovation or the desperate flailing of a society on the brink? Honestly, could be both. The truth is, meals weren't moments of joy, they were acts of survival. You ate what was there. You ate what hadn't rotted. You ate what wouldn't kill you immediately. Just give it 2 days. You hear the church bell ring in the distance. Not for supper, but for ration announcements. Turns out, this week, everyone gets half a potato and an inspirational pamphlet about grace and hunger. Classic. As your eyes start to close, your stomach gently gurgling, you imagine a world where food comes in packages, microwaves beep cheerfully, and nobody ever eats boiled eel again. But that's not your world. Not yet. You roll over on your hay-filled mattress. A single pea is lodged under your spine. You'll deal with it tomorrow. Or not. Sleep tight, colonial soul. If you're just joining us, we're knee-deep in the dry, flavorless world of colonial American cuisine. If you thought last night's boiled eel was bad, oh, sweet listener, tonight we stir the pot, literally. Imagine this. It's 1691. You wake up to the gentle screech of a chicken, a rooster who hates his life as much as you do. You roll out of your lumpy straw bed, your back aching like you just fought a war, which, by the way, could happen any year now. Breakfast isn't pancakes or scrambled eggs. Stew. Again. Colonial stew wasn't a recipe, it was a lifestyle. A cauldron hung over the fire, and into it went anything vaguely edible. Potatoes, turnips, beans, a piece of dried beef the dog wouldn't even sniff at, a carrot if you were lucky, and bones. Always bones. Boiled until soft enough to chew, because that's your calcium supplement. But here's the kicker. That stew pot? It wasn't emptied daily. Nope. The same pot might bubble over that fire for weeks. They just kept adding more water and ingredients to it, like an early version of patch notes for your survival. Historians call this concept perpetual stew. I call it a health inspector's fever dream. Now, you may wonder, did they ever finish the stew? Not really. It was a continuous brew of yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's desperation. Colonial mothers stirred it like they stirred their worries. Slowly, silently, endlessly. Occasionally, someone would toss in a squirrel or a pigeon. And when a celebration came around, say someone didn't die for a whole week, they might splurge on dumplings. But don't picture cute, fluffy dough balls. Colonial dumplings were fist-sized lumps of flour and water that could break a window. Or a tooth. One fascinating thing about this period is how food also carried social signals. If your stew smelled like beef, congratulations, you were slightly better off than the rest. If it smelled like shoe leather, well, you might actually be boiling shoe leather. It's been recorded. Food scarcity shaped the politics of the time, too. Leaders were judged not only on laws, but on whether their colony had enough salted pork and beans to last the winter. If you ran out, you didn't just lose votes, you lost people. Literally. Cold winters didn't care about your slogans. Speaking of politics, let's zoom in on a lesser-known tradition, the boiled election day pie. Oh yes, colonists would bake savory pies to bring to local election gatherings. But unlike modern campaign barbecues, these pies were less about taste and more about quantity. Packed with pigeon, rabbit, or mystery meat, they were baked in crude ovens and served lukewarm. One vote equals one greasy slice. Historians are still unsure whether this encouraged democracy or indigestion. And let's not forget the infamous third-day bread. Called that because by day 3, it was so dry you had to soak it in broth just to bite through it. Imagine biting into a brick, then imagining that brick had been alive once. Welcome to lunch. If you were on a farm, milk and cheese helped, but milk went sour fast, so people drank it slightly off. Colonial kids grew up on curdled dreams and mild stomach pain. Cheese was a delicacy if it didn't develop legs first. Now, let's pause for a moment of silence for the colonial salad. Just kidding. They didn't really do salad. Lettuce was seasonal and rarely grown. Most greens were boiled beyond recognition. If you served a modern kale salad in a colonial village, someone might call a priest. Even drinking water was a gamble. Wells were often shallow and shared with livestock. So people drank beer weak, cloudy, and barely alcoholic, but safer than cow juice. Babies drank it. Dokstrankite. Your grandmother drank it while knitting your one pair of wool socks. As you settle deeper into your blanket, a flicker of your modern kitchen crosses your mind. Fridge light, cold grapes, maybe a slice of pizza. Unimaginable luxuries to a colonial soul boiling beans at midnight. You listen to the wind creaking through the shutters, the ghost of the stew pot simmering softly in the corner of your mind. And as you fade into sleep, you dream of a fork. Just one fork. Because in 1691, most colonists only used spoons. You're still nestled in your blanket, eyes half shut, drifting on a gentle wave of historical boredom. Tonight, we wade very slowly through one of the stickiest subjects in colonial America, molasses. Not exactly the revolution you expected. Huh? But hold on. This syrupy substance didn't just sweeten porridge, it helped spark a war. First, let's talk molasses itself. Thick, brown, pours like a sluggish river of sadness. Imported from the Caribbean, molasses was everywhere in colonial kitchens, used to make rum, gingerbread, and something ominously called boiled sweets. The texture? Closer to motor oil than anything appetizing. But in the colonies, it was gold. And like all things that glimmer, gold gets taxed. Enter the Molasses Act of 1733, a snoozer of a law passed by the British Parliament to stop the colonies from buying cheap molasses from the French West Indies. Parliament wanted everyone to stick with overpriced British molasses, which tasted like regret and overcooked raisins. But here's the twist. The act wasn't really enforced. Like that gym membership you keep saying you'll use. Colonists just ignored it. They kept smuggling in French molasses by the barrel, slipping past sleepy customs agents who, frankly, didn't care. Until suddenly someone did care. Cue dramatic flute music. In 1764, Parliament passed the Sugar Act, a stricter, snarkier cousin of the Molasses Act. This one said, "We're watching. Seriously, no more sneaking syrup under the table." Customs agents were given real power. Smugglers were arrested. And colonists who didn't love paperwork or British rules started to get mad. What's fascinating and oh so dull is how this thick liquid became a symbol of rebellion. Entire underground economies were built around molasses. Ship captains bribed officials with barrels. Families paid debts with jugs. Colonial teens probably traded it like Pokemon cards. In Boston taverns, drunken rants about King George's sticky tyranny grew louder. Picture a table of wig-wearing men, red-faced from rum, shouting, "They'll pry this molasses from my cold, syrup-coated hands." Meanwhile, back at home, the molasses was quietly fermenting in barrels. If the lid wasn't sealed, it exploded. That's right. Barrels of molasses, basically time bombs of sugar. Nothing like waking up to a 2 a.m. molasses blast in the root cellar. Fast forward to 1770. Colonists were cranky, not just about molasses but paper taxes, tea taxes, and the general vibe of imperial micromanagement. The Boston Massacre happened, and while it had nothing to do with molasses directly, the anger had been simmering for decades. Like stew or syrup. But molasses wouldn't be outdone. Oh no, it made a comeback in 1919. Stay with me. In Boston, a giant molasses tank, holding over 2 million gallons, burst. A tidal wave of hot molasses crashed through the North End, killing 21 people, injuring over 150, and flooding streets in a sticky tsunami. Historians call it the Great Molasses Flood. People drowned in it, horses stuck in it. It hardened so quickly in the cold that entire rescue efforts failed. Weeks later, the smell still lingered. Decades later, locals swore the sidewalks still felt tacky. So yes, molasses is slow. But don't underestimate its impact. It seeped into every corner of early America, quietly sweetening, fermenting, and sometimes exploding. Now, as you lie in the gentle embrace of history-induced drowsiness, let your mind imagine a world before Nutella and peanut butter, where dessert came in the form of a spoonful of hot syrup on stale bread, where rum meant survival and a leak in a barrel could mean jail time. Let molasses lull you, slow and heavy, a dream you can't escape but also can't remember. And as you drift off, remember this: sometimes revolutions don't start with fireworks. They start with syrup. Welcome back, sleepyhead. You've survived the great molasses flood of history. Now it's time to take a seat, literally. But not just any seat. A hand-carved, creaky, probably uncomfortable colonial-era chair. Tonight's yawn-worthy journey drifts into the world of early American furniture. Not because it was exciting, not because it was revolutionary, but precisely because it wasn't. Let's begin with the Windsor chair. Picture this. It's the 1700s. You walk into a colonial tavern. The air smells like pipe smoke, overcooked onions, and regret. A group of farmers sit around a scarred oak table, each perched upon a thin-legged, wobbly Windsor chair. These chairs were a marvel of boring practicality. Bindles, a rounded back, made of various woods: elm, ash, pine. The kind of furniture that said, "We believe in structure, not comfort." If you sat too long, your back ached. If you leaned, it cracked. But to colonists, they were perfect. Why? Because they could be made fast, cheap, and didn't require cushions. You sat on wood like nature intended. Cushions were for aristocrats, and these guys were revolutionaries. But the Windsor wasn't the only guest at the table. Let's slowly, ever so slowly, swivel our gaze to the trestle table. A long plank of wood, 2 support beams, crossbars. That's it. No ornate carvings, no gold leaf. Just enough space to eat your salted pork and complain about taxes. Colonial homes didn't prioritize dining aesthetics. They were lucky if the table didn't wobble when someone sneezed. Now we descend into deeper sleep as we visit the chest. Not a pirate's treasure chest, mind you. Just a big wooden box with a lid. Used to store blankets, flour, secrets, and sometimes children's toys carved from corn husks. Yes, corn husks. They didn't have closets back then. No IKEA wardrobes. Just chests, stacked in corners, filled with fabric and dreams. Some had a lock. Others didn't. A chest with a lock meant you had something worth hiding, like 3 spoons instead of 2, or letters from someone in Boston. Scandalous. Let's not forget the butter churn stool. Short, stumpy, purpose-built for long afternoons of churnin' and yearnin'. You sat, you churned, you thought about life, or nothing at all. One woman in 1769 claimed she received a marriage proposal on a churn stool. It was said to be as romantic as circumstances allowed. She accepted. Now, for a true test of your wakefulness, the cabinet makers' guilds. Yes, even furniture builders had drama. In cities like Philadelphia and Boston, cabinet makers formed guilds, elite groups that set furniture standards, wages, and pricing. If someone tried to sell a chair with unauthorized joints, the guild might fine them or worse, write a stern letter. Scandalous stuff. But for the average colonist, furniture wasn't about prestige. It was about survival. You needed a table to eat at, a chair to sit on while mending socks, a bed that didn't collapse in the middle of the night, and maybe, just maybe, a candle stand so you could read your Bible or stare into the flame, questioning your existence. Ah yes, the 4-poster bed. Tall, draped in heavy curtains to keep out cold winds, mice, and ghosts. Colonists slept with nightcaps on. Not for style, but because insulation was life. The bed creaked. The straw mattress smelled faintly of damp wheat. But it was home. And so, as your eyelids grow heavier, and your modern mattress cradles your weary body, remember, the colonists didn't have memory foam. They had wooden frames, lumpy hay, and stiff necks. But it worked. They dreamed. They slept. And now, so do you. Close your eyes. The furniture will hold. Tomorrow, we'll explore Section 5. The excitingly uneventful history of colonial mailboxes. A topic so slow, it makes molasses look like lightning. You've braved the wooden stiffness of colonial furniture and survived without splinters. Now, prepare to snooze through something even more exhilarating. The birth of the colonial mailbox, or, more accurately, the lack of one. You see, in the 1600s and 1700s, America didn't exactly have a thriving postal system. No cheerful mail carriers in uniform. No jingling bags of letters. No awkward Amazon returns. Let's go back to pre-1775. You've written a heartfelt letter to your cousin in Virginia. It says, "Dear Margaret, the wheat has sprouted. I have a rash. The neighbor may be a witch. Regards, Jeremiah." But how does it get there? That's where the boredom begins. Option 1. You hand it to a traveler headed vaguely in the right direction. He says, "I'll give it to someone who's going to Virginia." He probably won't. Option 2. You leave it at a local tavern and pray. Yes, taverns were the closest thing to a post office. Letters were left in piles or tacked to walls with instructions like, "To be delivered when convenient," or "Never," whichever comes first. And so began the long, sleepy evolution of American mail. Enter the Crown's mail system. Before America got its own postal service, we used the British Royal Mail, which was basically like asking your neighbor's grumpy uncle to take your diary to your grandma. Risky. Post riders, often teenage boys with zero training and even less urgency, would gallop along dirt roads, dodging potholes and sometimes bandits. Deliveries could take weeks or months, depending on weather, horse health, and whether the rider got distracted by pie. In 1707, the British finally established a more official postal route between New York and Boston called the Post Road. It wasn't a highway. It was barely a trail. Trees fell across it regularly. In winter, it vanished beneath snow. In summer, it turned to mud. But people were grateful. Kind of. You might wait a month to hear from your aunt, only to receive this. "Dear niece, I have misplaced my cat. It may be under the bread oven. Yours in worry, Henrietta." The legendary Benjamin Franklin, sort of. Let's pause to whisper about Ben Franklin, who's often hailed as the father of the American Postal Service. In 1753, Franklin became Joint Postmaster General for the colonies. He standardized routes, introduced mile markers, and made mail delivery slightly faster. Not fast, just less slow. He also did something radical. He insisted that post riders leave and arrive on a schedule. For the first time, people could say, "The mail should come Tuesday," instead of, "It may come next harvest." Thanks, Ben. You brought a small yawn of progress to our sleepy tale. But what about mailboxes? Ah yes, the mailbox itself. That quaint, quiet, unloved container where hopes and bills collide. In colonial times, there were no personal mailboxes. None. If your town had a post office, that was it. You went there. You asked the clerk, probably named Amos, if you had any letters. Amos looked through a small wooden drawer. He frowned. He said no. You walked home. End of story. Sometimes, communities would hang mailbags in the general store. If you were lucky, your letter was there. If you weren't, it got dropped on the floor or used to light a pipe. Home mail delivery wouldn't become standard until the mid to late 1800s. And mailboxes? Those weren't required by law until the 1920s, meaning people spent over a century just winging it. A final nod to colonial mail drama. There was very little excitement in colonial mail, but occasionally a scandal would erupt, like when a letter went missing or was opened before delivery. In 1774, John Adams wrote in his diary that British officials were spying on the mail. People began using secret codes and invisible ink. For about 6 weeks, it was thrilling. Then it went back to being very, very dull. So tonight, as you drift into your slumber, imagine yourself in a drafty tavern, waiting for a letter that may never come. You sip weak ale. You stare at a dusty wall. You yawn, and you wait. The message is in the mail. Or maybe it isn't. Either way, you can rest. Next time on Boring History for Sleep, Section 6, Buttons, Buckles, and Breeches. A slow thread through colonial fashion. Sweet dreams, letterless friend. Tonight, we're entering the linen-laced world of colonial clothing. A realm so neutral, so sensibly stitched, it could lull a caffeinated squirrel to sleep. Imagine the year is 1720. You awake before sunrise. You stretch, you scratch, and you prepare to put on approximately 17 separate articles of clothing, most of which are designed to chafe. Let's begin with the foundation of boredom. Underwear. Layer 1, the long, dreary underlayer. Underwear in colonial times wasn't cute. It wasn't lacy. It didn't come in bold colors. It came in linen and had the personality of a stale biscuit. Men wore long shirts down to their thighs, Women wore shifts which were nearly the same but less thrilling. This undergarment did everything: pajamas, undershirt, towel, blanket if needed. It rarely got washed. That's right. The shift absorbed your essence, day in and day out. The more seasoned it became, the less likely it was to fall apart or be hugged. Layer 2. Breeches, stays, and suffering. Now comes the real fun. Men pulled on breeches, tight-fitting pants that stopped at the knee, secured with laces, buttons, or pure stubbornness. Women had the delight of wearing stays, an early corset designed not for allure but for posture. It was stiff, whaleboned, and made slouching a crime. Add a petticoat or two, maybe 3 if you're feeling rebellious. These were not frilly. These were not glamorous. They were more like quilted sausages wrapped around your legs, the outerwear of ennui. On top of that, men wore waistcoats, often wool, and not because they were cold, but because fashion said so. It was hot? Too bad. Wear it. Women threw on gowns with bodices so tight they made breathing optional. Over that, jackets, cloaks, caps, bonnets, aprons, mitts, and occasionally a thing called a mob cap, which sounds exciting but is essentially a sleepy mushroom for your head. Shoes, a slow march of suffering. Colonial shoes were hand-stitched leather slabs with a buckle on top. No right foot, no left foot. They were identical. You broke them in by sheer willpower or gave up and wore them anyway. Socks, wool tubes. In the rain, your feet got wet. In snow, your feet froze. No Gore-Tex, just regrets and cold toes. Color me beige. What color was all this glorious fashion? Mostly brown, gray, dull blue, sad green, and beige so light it looked like fog in a bucket. Why? Because dye was expensive. If your clothes were bright, it meant you had money, or you were royalty, or just a very determined criminal tailor. Most people wore clothes that matched the mud they walked through. No one stood out. No one cared. It was democratic dullness. Buckles, the ultimate status symbol. Now here's a shiny bit, but only a bit. Buckles were not just for function. They were bling, colonial style.
Schuhe buckles, Knie buckles, hat buckles.
The more metal you had, the more people thought, wow, he probably owns 2 pigs. But again, they were heavy, clunky, and sometimes fell off in the street. Nothing says dignity like chasing your hat buckled down a cobblestone road. The fashion cycle was glacial. Unlike today, colonial fashion trends didn't change every season. They changed every few decades, if at all. Your grandmother's style was still perfectly acceptable. So was your great-grandmother's. So was everyone else's. Your clothing wasn't a statement, it was a chore, a final hem of thought. As you snuggle beneath your 21st century sheets, remember, at this very moment in history, someone once spent 45 minutes lacing up a garment they would sweat in all day while churning butter. There were no zippers, no elastic, just hooks, buttons, and God's test of patience. So rest now, knowing that while your dreams may be wild, your clothes will never be this uncomfortable. Tomorrow, we thread deeper into the colonial abyss with Section 7, the Molasses Act of 1733, a sticky tale of trade, taxes, and tedium. Until then, sleep tight, and don't let the breeches bite. The year is 1733. The British Parliament, always alert to the thrilling rhythms of taxation, introduced a law so uneventful it could be whispered to a crying baby as a lullaby, the Molasses Act. This wasn't an act about drama, nor music, nor public morals. It was about molasses, that thick, slow-moving syrup extracted from sugar cane, best known for making gingerbread chewy and life in the colonies slightly more tolerable. But like all things colonial, even sweetness was tangled in politics. Britain wanted to favor its own sugar colonies in the West Indies. But the American colonists, ever pragmatic, were importing cheaper molasses from the French and Dutch Caribbean islands. It was syrupy betrayal. So Parliament slapped on a tax, 6 pence per gallon, on any molasses not from the British Empire. That's right, they taxed sugar goo. Now, what happened next wasn't rebellion. Not yet. The colonists simply did what they would become famous for, ignoring it entirely. Smuggling molasses became as common as sneezing. Merchants developed creative ways to disguise shipments. Barrels were mislabeled. Bribes were passed. Officials looked the other way, often because they were in on the scheme. It was the passive-aggressive golden age of commerce. No one really enforced the tax and no one really paid it. But the law just sat there, like a forgotten jar in a pantry. Sticky, overlooked, and destined to ferment. Meanwhile, molasses continued to flow into ports like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. It sweetened rum, powered trade, and fueled a black market economy so slow-moving and quiet it could rock a harbor to sleep. The Molasses Act lingered for decades, gathering dust and quiet resentment. It didn't spark protests. It didn't cause riots. It just hovered, like a fruit fly waiting to become history. But even dull laws cast long shadows. Because this wasn't the last tax. It wasn't even the worst tax. It was the beginning of a British habit. Tax first, ignore enforcement later. And with each ignored law, each molasses barrel that slipped through unnoticed, the colonies grew a little more confident, a little more bold, a little more tired of the crown's slow drip of control. But all of that was in the future. For now, ships creaked in the night, barrels rolled onto docks, and molasses oozed its way into both the economy and the dreams of bored customs agents. Sleep now, with the scent of sugar in your mind and the knowledge that bureaucracy, even when sticky, is rarely fast or exciting. You leave behind the sluggish sweetness of molasses and now ride alongside something even slower, colonial mail delivery. Picture it: dirt roads, hoof prints, and a soggy letter arriving 2 months too late to warn you about, well, almost anything. The British colonies sprawled along the Atlantic coast like tired bookmarks. But between them, forests, mud, mountains, and very few decent roads. So, how did colonists communicate? With gritted teeth and unreasonable patience. The post roads of the 18th century weren't roads the way we think of them now. They were more like vague suggestions. Path here, a tree notch there, maybe a wooden bridge that creaks like it's haunted by every horse that ever slipped on it. In 1692, the Crown finally allowed a postal system to be established in the colonies. Sounds efficient, right? It wasn't. The first official postal route connected Boston to New York. That's roughly 200 miles of travel. On horseback, over puddles, rocks, and probably some judgmental raccoons. It took at least 2 weeks one way, and that was if the weather was pleasant. The horse didn't die, and the rider didn't get sidetracked by, say, wolves or boredom. You're starting to see why no one used the mail unless they absolutely had to. Mail delivery became an endurance sport for the unfortunate men who took on the job. One particularly unglamorous title? Post rider. Imagine clinging to a tired horse with a satchel full of soggy love letters and tax warnings. You weren't just delivering mail. You were defying nature with every hoofbeat. And the mail itself wasn't just personal. It carried news, albeit old, often irrelevant news, printed on newspapers that would arrive weeks after the event. The king has issued a new decree. It might read, 2 months ago. How stirring. Historians still debate whether the colonial post really united the colonies or merely reminded them how long everything took. Sure, Benjamin Franklin later revamped the system, but even he couldn't make a letter sprint. Franklin's upgrades in the 1750s included milestones, maps, and, drumroll, better horses. But still, the process was so glacial that, if you sneezed when the letter was sent, you'd have grown a beard by the time the reply came. Of course, for all its delays, the Postal Service was the quiet backbone of revolution to be. It allowed ideas to crawl from town to town, pamphlets whispering sedition, newspaper essays challenging British policy, gossip about imported wigs and outrageous tea prices. It was like the first version of social media, if social media had to survive rain, mildew, and fox bites. And still, it was boring. Not dramatic, not dangerous, just long. Long waits, long trails, long sighs. It's almost poetic. A country inching toward revolution on a trail of letters, muddy footprints, and the occasional squashed biscuit in a messenger's coat. So sleep comes naturally here, lulled by hoofbeats on damp earth and the faint rustle of parchment in the night. There's no urgency, no alarms, just the persistent yawn of a continent trying to stay in touch. And trust me, nothing will arrive on time. By the time you leave the tired thump of hoofbeats behind, your journey meanders into something even more excruciatingly slow, the building of canals. Yes, canals. Not the romantic gondola kind. The dig a trench through miles of forest, mud, and mosquito-infested swamp kind. You've just entered the early 19th century, and the United States is dreaming big and digging slowly. It's 1817, and New York has this wild idea: connect the Hudson River to the Great Lakes. This becomes the Erie Canal, a name so famous it almost sounds exciting. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Imagine 6 million tons of dirt, 35,000 workers, and a lot of arguments over mule logistics. You stand at the edge of a shallow ditch, half carved into soggy earth, watching Irish immigrants and local laborers hacking away with shovels, sweating in cotton shirts and hoping they don't hit a boulder. Every 10 feet is a potential delay. Tree roots, quick mud, swearing in 5 languages. Why even build a canal? Because rivers were the highways of the day. And unfortunately, not every place had a river. Overland transport? Horrific. Wagons bounced, broke, and got stuck in ruts so deep they became unintended bathtubs. A canal promised a smoother ride for boats loaded with lumber, wheat, barrels of salt pork, and maybe some very confused chickens. And boats were the secret. Specifically, canal boats. Long, narrow barges pulled by mules walking along paths beside the water. Yes, mules. If you think this sounds like a painfully slow aquatic parade, you'd be right. The mules walked, the boats crept, the passengers stared blankly into the reeds. Children on board probably counted cattails to stay sane. The trip from Albany to Buffalo took 10 days. 10 days of splashing water, creaking ropes, and low bridges where you had to duck to avoid a sudden forehead injury. Historians still argue whether the Erie Canal was a stroke of genius or just an unusually damp public works project. It did work, after all. It slashed transport costs and made New York the economic envy of the young nation. But for everyone actually using the canal, it was the scenic route, in slow motion. Of course, this inspired a brief canal-building mania. Ohio, Pennsylvania, even Illinois tried to copy the idea. And by copy, we mean spend too much money digging watery ditches through places that didn't really need them. One lesser-known canal? The Middlesex Canal in Massachusetts. It was supposed to make Boston a shipping hub. Instead, it mostly flooded some fields and gave local frogs new vacation homes. And there were problems. Winter froze the water. Summer dried it up. Locks broke. Boats got stuck. Mules refused to cooperate. Once, in 1825, a ceremonial boat on the Erie Canal sank during its victory lap because someone overloaded it with dignitaries and cheese. The most exciting moment during a canal trip? Passing another boat, but very slowly, with awkward nods. Like, "Hello there, fellow traveler of tedium. I see your mule is slightly less grumpy than mine today." Canal towns popped up along the routes. Sleepy little places with names like Lockport and Towpath Hollow. Each with a tavern, a rope maker, and probably someone trying to sell you a wooden spoon shaped like George Washington's head. But the canal era didn't last long. Just a few decades, really. By the time railroads chugged into view, canals were already yesterday's news. Tracks were faster, drier, and didn't require livestock with attitude problems. Still, for a brief moment in American history, canals were the cutting edge of transportation. They connected cities, moved goods, carried dreams at approximately 3 miles per hour. So tonight, as you drift along this watery ribbon of boredom, you can almost hear the slosh of a canal boat slipping by in the dark. Somewhere, a mule snorts, a lantern flickers, and a weary traveler wonders if they'll ever reach Buffalo. They will, just not soon. Buffalo fades behind you, not with a dramatic crescendo, but with the soft groan of a canal boat's hull settling into the mud. The canal age, while noble in its own drowsy way, quietly slips into the background as you wander into a new chapter of American monotony. The railroad boom. Yes, trains. Not the sleek, aerodynamic bullets of today, but soot-belching, gear-grinding metal beasts that rattled their way across the 19th century landscape. They screamed, wheezed, and sparked, and Americans loved them once they stopped catching fire. It's the 1830s now. The steam locomotive is still a curious, untrustworthy contraption to most folks. But a few ambitious minds, aka rich men in top hats, see the future in steel rails. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was one of the first. In the beginning, it wasn't even pulled by engines. Horses trotted awkwardly between the rails like very confused train substitutes. But soon came a true locomotive, the Tom Thumb. It attempted to race a horse-drawn carriage. The engine lost when a belt flew off. Spectacular? Hardly. But promising? Sure. Building railroads was not glamorous. Crews hacked through forests, blasted through hills, and laid thousands of miles of track by hand. Picture exhausted Irish and Chinese laborers, balancing iron rails while trying not to be crushed by their own progress. It was brutal, dangerous, and strangely repetitive. Step, spike, lift, repeat. You now walk alongside one of these tracks. It stretches endlessly in a straight line toward some distant, foggy town with a name like Clinkerville or Gudgeon Hollow. Nothing breaks the view except the occasional wooden water tower and the hunched silhouette of a telegraph pole. As the 1840s become the 1850s, railroads become America's nervous system. Everything moves faster. Cotton, coal, passengers with large hats and motion sickness. Entire towns spring up where the trains decide to stop, and others vanish when they don't. In 1869, something almost exciting happens. The Transcontinental Railroad is completed. Workers from the Central Pacific and Union Pacific meet in Utah, and with great ceremony, they drive a golden spike into the railbed. Cue patriotic music. Or not, because shortly afterward, the golden spike is quietly removed and replaced with an iron one. Nobody wanted a golden theft magnet just lying around. The trip from coast to coast, once a harrowing 6-month wagon odyssey, could now be done in a week. Still, that week was a masterclass in discomfort. Trains shook. Coal dust floated into everything. Seats were wooden. Toilets were questionable. But people were willing to endure it to chase dreams or escape them. Meanwhile, railway companies played monopoly with real land. They got massive government land grants and often ran roughshod over native lands, farms, and common sense. They built not always where needed, but where profitable. And profit? Oh, it flowed. Into the pockets of rail barons who smoked cigars longer than your arm and named towns after their children. Then came standard time. Before trains, every town ran on its own local time. Noon was when the sun was directly overhead. This worked fine, until trains started crashing because conductors couldn't agree on what time it was. So in 1883, the U.S. was carved into 4 time zones. Some towns resisted, but the trains didn't wait. By the late 1800s, railroads were everywhere. They connected cities, carried mail, brought circus animals to unsuspecting small towns, and made long-distance boredom an American tradition. Some stations were grand and ornate. Others were just a bench and a guy named Earl who sold apples. You settle now into a third-class passenger car. The wooden seat creaks. A baby wails in the distance. A man 2 rows up talks about grain prices as if it's thrilling. Outside, the landscape scrolls slowly past. A blur of wheat, fence posts, and the occasional cow that seems unimpressed by your speed. There's no air conditioning.
No Wi-Fi.
Just the rhythmic click-clack of wheels over tracks, a lullaby of mechanical repetition. You start to drift, not just through America, but through time. Railroads would dominate American life for over a century. Wars would be fought, cities would rise, and fortunes would be made. And yet, so much of it happened while people dozed against train windows, lulled by the hum of movement and the hope of somewhere else. And maybe, just maybe, that's where you're headed to. As the train hums onward and the century ticks closer to its twilight, you roll gently into the late 1800s, a time sometimes called the Gilded Age. But don't let the name fool you. Underneath that shiny surface of industrial boom and wealthy mustaches was a whole lot of paperwork. You find yourself walking into an office now. Not a thrilling kind with glass walls or secret files. No, this is the dull, magnificent birth of American bureaucracy. And no, you can't escape it. Inside, rows of clerks in stiff collars shuffle ledgers and file receipts under the dim buzz of gaslights. The air is thick with ink, paper dust, and the faint smell of ambition. Welcome to the age of civil service reform. Sounds exciting? It isn't. That's kind of the point. It all begins with the spoils system, a charming term for giving government jobs to your friends and people who gave you money. Presidents would take office and promptly replace thousands of civil servants with their personal entourage. Competency was optional. Breathing was ideal. This all changed gradually and reluctantly after the assassination of President James Garfield in 1881. A disappointed office seeker shot him, believing he deserved a job. America collectively said, "Wait, maybe this system is dumb." Cue the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. It established that some jobs should be awarded based on merit, not political favors. So now, instead of bribing someone for a job, you had to take a test. Hundreds of them. A new national pastime was born: government exams and forms. But don't worry, we're not just stuck in an office. Outside, cities are rising in iron and soot. Skyscrapers stab upward thanks to steel beams and an exciting new invention: the elevator. Before elevators, most people lived on the lower floors of buildings. Now, with vertical travel a thing, the wealthy claimed the top. Thus, America literally flipped its social structure. You watch as buildings like the home insurance building in Chicago climb 10 stories into the sky. 10. People are impressed. They squint at it with monocles and marvel at the architectural sorcery of not falling down. As cities swell, immigrants pour in. Ellis Island opens in 1892, and you drift silently among families clutching bundles and hope. They wait in endless lines, answer awkward questions, and get their names misspelled forever. But they keep coming. By 1900, New York is a melting pot full of noise, promise, and pickpockets. Factories, meanwhile, buzz with activity and accident-prone machinery. Labor is grueling. Children work long hours. Men lose fingers. Women earn pennies. But production skyrockets. America is mass-producing steel, textiles, light bulbs, and chewing gum. Capitalism hums like a factory belt. Fast, loud, and kind of dangerous. Unions begin to rise from the ashes of industrial exhaustion. The Knights of Labor, the American Federation of Labor, names you'd probably skim past in a textbook, organize strikes and demand better conditions. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they're met with clubs, tear gas, or just deafening indifference. Back in Washington, presidents come and go. Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland again. Yes, again. A real ping-pong of power. None of them are terribly thrilling.
No wars.
No scandals worth a Netflix series. Just tariffs. Endless debates about tariffs. It's during Cleveland's second round that the panic of 1893 hits. A bank crisis ripples through the economy. Railroads collapse. Unemployment soars. Coxey's Army, a group of unemployed men, marches to D.C. in protest, only to be arrested for walking on the grass. Not very rebellious, but very on-brand for the decade. And somewhere in all this, the light bulb goes on. Literally. Thomas Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, brings artificial light to the American home. Slowly, gas lamps are replaced by glowing filaments. Night becomes optional. But it isn't flashy. At first, it's just dim bulbs in quiet parlors, humming with the promise of modernity. As the 19th century flickers out like the flame it's replacing, America is growing not just larger but more complex. There are systems now, rules,
Institution.
Cities with populations too large to know themselves. It's all building towards something. Something else. But for now, the paperwork is filed. The tracks are laid. The cities breathe with steam. And you, still aboard your sleepy train through time, drift gently past steel mills and post offices, skyscrapers and tenements, waiting to see what comes next. The train sighs and rolls into the 20th century. Not with a bang, but with a quiet rattle of wheels on polished steel. Outside the window, horses still clip-clop on cobblestone. But the hum of something new, something electric, begins to echo in the distance. Welcome to the progressive era where America tidies up its own messes, very slowly, with great paperwork. You step off into a world trying very hard to be better. Cities are bursting at the seams, and the problems are hard to ignore. So people begin reforming. There are crusades against child labor, campaigns for safer food. Journalists, called muckrakers, dig into political corruption, unsanitary meatpacking, and shady business deals. Their articles are long. Their tone is stern, but they make change happen. Slowly, through committees. Theodore Roosevelt, a walking contradiction in pince-nez glasses, storms into the presidency after McKinley's assassination. Teddy is loud, full of energy and loves trust-busting, breaking up monopolies like Standard Oil and railroad cartels. He reads thick reports for fun and sometimes invites boxers to the White House. He also saves forests, a lot of them. He creates national parks and hires people to stand in front of trees, protecting them with clipboards. But don't get too excited. There's still plenty of regulation to come. The Pure Food and Drug Act is passed. Factories are inspected. Labels are introduced. No more magic tonics made of alcohol, opium, and wishful thinking. You wander through quiet laboratories where men with mustaches now measure things. Doses, chemicals, germs. It's thrilling in a very controlled, orderly way. Meanwhile, suffragists march in tailored dresses, holding signs politely but persistently. They're fighting for the vote, and they do it with long meetings, pamphlets, and well-argued speeches. Takes decades, but the quiet rustle of progress is constant. Then World War I. It arrives like an unexpected guest at a dinner party you didn't plan. Europe explodes in 1914, but America stays out. At first, for 3 long years, the U.S. practices neutrality, which mostly means writing letters, selling supplies, and awkwardly avoiding eye contact. But then a ship sinks, the Lusitania. Telegrams are intercepted. Lines are crossed. And in 1917, America joins the war to make the world safe for democracy. Soldiers are drafted. Uniforms are sewn. Doughboys sail across the Atlantic into trenches that smell of mud and old promises. Back home, rationing begins. Posters bloom on every wall. Victory gardens. War bonds. Liberty cabbage instead of sauerkraut. You walk into silent kitchens where families weigh sugar by the spoonful and write long letters to soldiers they barely know. When the war ends, it ends quietly. There's no grand finale, just an armistice signed in a railcar and a lingering question. What now? The 1920s answer with jazz and credit cards. But that's another chapter. For now, your train pulls gently through the calm between storms. The progressive era, neither wild nor dull, but dutiful, passes by in sepia tones. Its heroes are inspectors, librarians, scientists, and senators who believed that forms could fix the world. And maybe, in their quiet way, they weren't entirely wrong. The engine hums a new rhythm as you're carried into the 1920s, an era that tries its very best to forget everything heavy that just happened. The war is over. The world didn't exactly get saved, but at least it's still spinning. So, America does what it does best when it wants to look forward. It parties. You step off into a city street that smells like perfume and gasoline. Women in short dresses and cloche hats laugh in low-lit speakeasies. Their hair is bobbed. Their voices are sharp. They dance to jazz that seems to come from nowhere, like the wind just picked it up from New Orleans and blew it through a brass horn. Cars honk, stocks soar, and radios hum from apartment windows like lullabies for the modern age. You hear baseball games and jazz concerts and the occasional tinny voice urging you to buy toothpaste. There's electricity everywhere, literal and metaphorical. But this shiny, roaring decade has its shadows. Prohibition, for one. In 1920, the 18th Amendment kicks in, banning alcohol across the nation. In theory, this means no more public drunkenness, no more brawling saloons. In practice, it means bootleggers, bathtub gin, and speakeasies hidden behind soda shops. The government hires prohibition agents. Most are underpaid. Some are deeply corrupt. It's a game of hide and seek played with barrels and false walls. You walk through one of these hidden joints, smoke curling, saxophones wailing. No one looks up. Everyone knows it's illegal. No one cares. Meanwhile, the economy does cartwheels. The stock market grows like it's on caffeine. Americans invest in companies they've barely heard of. Margin buying becomes the national hobby. Why not? Stocks only go up, right? Airplanes become a thing. You watch Charles Lindbergh make headlines by flying solo across the Atlantic, barely blinking. The skies seem like the next frontier. At the same time, in Dayton, Ohio, two quiet brothers you remember, Orville and Wilbur, would probably smile and nod. Back on the ground, Harlem pulses with creativity. It's the Harlem Renaissance, where poets, painters, and musicians, mostly black and unapologetically brilliant, create art that still echoes today. You stroll past murals, typewriters, and smoky stages where voices like Langston Hughes and Bessie Smith change the rhythm of American thought. But you feel a tremor. Just beneath the glitter, something's off. Farmers are struggling. Overproduction meets falling prices. Rural banks close. And nobody's paying attention because, well, New York looks amazing. Then, October 1929. The stock market hiccups, then chokes. On a day now called Black Tuesday, the market crashes. Fortunes vanish in hours. Some brokers sob. Others go silent. People joke darkly about window exits. The optimism of the decade collapses like a paper chandelier in a gust of cold, economic wind. You walk through suddenly quiet streets. Soup kitchens appear. Bread lines stretch. The jazz still plays, but it sounds more like a memory than a celebration. The roaring 20s promised champagne and electric dreams. What they delivered, by the end, was a hangover, one the country will wrestle with for years. As you board your train again, the station's lights flicker. There's no more roar, just a long, echoing hush. And ahead, the Great Depression waits. The moment you step out of the carriage, you feel it, the weight of the 1930s. It's not just the dust in the air or the hollow quiet of boarded-up storefronts. It's in the way people walk, heads slightly lowered, steps a little slower, as if the whole country is holding its breath and hoping someone else will fix it first. This is the Great Depression. The stock market crash wasn't just a bad day on Wall Street. It was a domino that toppled the lives of millions. Banks failed by the hundreds. People who had saved for years watched it all vanish in a blink. If you were lucky, you stood in a bread line. If you weren't, you wandered, looking for work, a meal, or someone with just enough to share. You trudge along Route 66, watching families pile everything they own onto rickety trucks headed west. California or bust, they say. Dust clouds rise behind them, thick as smoke, especially in the Midwest, where the Dust Bowl is turning once rich farmland into a brown ocean of choking wind. Farmers try to hold on, but the earth itself seems tired of trying. You stop in Oklahoma. There's not much left. Crops are gone. Livestock lies stiff under a sky that won't cry. Dust seeps into houses, lungs, dreams. Historians still argue whether poor farming practices or just plain climate cruelty caused the worst of it. But to the people here, the reasons don't matter. They're just trying to breathe. And yet, somewhere between tragedy and total collapse, something peculiar happens. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You see him riding in an open car, smiling that famous smile that says, "Yes, everything is awful, but let's pretend it might not stay that way." He launches the New Deal, a grand buffet of programs, agencies, and alphabet soup. WPA, CCC, TVA, they spill across the country like scaffolding, trying to hold the broken beams of America upright. You watch young men plant trees, build trails, paint murals. You see artists paid to write plays and musicians to play concerts for towns that forgot what joy sounded like. It's government as lifeguard, throwing out every rope it can find. And while some argue whether the New Deal truly saved the economy or just softened the fall, there's no denying it gave people something to do, something to believe in. But there's another storm building. Over in Europe, a mustached man in Germany is making angry speeches. Mussolini's posturing in Italy. Japan's tightening its grip on Asia. You read headlines. War is whispering again. Back in the US, most people want no part of it. Isolationism is the mood of the moment. We've done our bit, they say. Let Europe sort itself out. But behind closed doors, factories hum quietly. Defense budgets grow. And FDR, ever the chess player, starts moving the pieces. You sit by a radio, everyone does now. It's the fireplace of the Depression. You hear Roosevelt's voice in a fireside chat, calm and warm, promising that the only thing to fear is fear itself. It helps. A little. People still dance. They still fall in love. They go to movies. Escape in black and white worlds where problems are smaller and endings happier. You watch Shirley Temple tap her way across the screen like nothing bad ever existed. You smile despite yourself. But underneath the glamour and government programs, the scars remain. Unemployment remains high. Tensions simmer. Some blame immigrants. Others blame the banks. Still others gather under fringe flags, desperate for someone to blame that isn't themselves. And then, it happens.
À distant explosion.
Ships on fire. Planes in the sky. Pearl Harbor. But you're not there yet. That's the next station. For now, the 1930s are a strange lullaby, sung in a minor key, lined with dust, hope, and just enough movement to keep the dream alive. The lull doesn't last. It's December 7th, 1941. You are sitting in a diner, sipping lukewarm coffee, when the radio interrupts its usual swing tune. The broadcaster's voice trembles. Words like attack, naval base, and casualties hang in the air like smoke. Pearl Harbor. You don't need details. You just know everything has changed. The next morning, Roosevelt speaks to Congress, calm, stern, unyielding. A date which will live in infamy. The words ring like a bell that can't be unheard. By day's end, America is at war. Again, factories roar to life. The Great Depression fades not because it was solved, but because war demands production, and production needs workers. Suddenly, there's no shortage of jobs. Women take up tools in shipyards and aircraft plants. Rosie the Riveter becomes a symbol of strength and necessity. Ration books appear in homes. Victory gardens grow in backyards. Every radio crackles with updates from the front. You follow the journey of a young man named James, drafted at 19. He trains in Georgia, ships out from New York, and lands in North Africa. From there, it's Sicily, then France. You read his letters home. They're neat, hopeful, trying not to scare his mother. But the truth is there between the lines. Mud, blood, cold nights. Brothers lost. He is one story in millions. Back home, the country transforms. Japanese Americans, many of them citizens, are forced into internment camps. It's a dark stain on a nation claiming to fight for freedom abroad. Few resist. Most are silent. Fear makes quiet companions. In Europe, Hitler's reach begins to shrink. D-Day arrives, June 6, 1944. You witness the beaches of Normandy from afar, hearing only fragments. Waves, bullets, the thud of boots and breath. It's not glorious. It's grim and necessary. Meanwhile, the Pacific Theater rages. Island by island, the U.S. advances Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each name etched in pain and sacrifice. The enemy does not surrender easily. Every inch is bought in blood. Then, something unimaginable. August 6, 1945. A flash over Hiroshima. Then, Nagasaki. The world splits open. You don't see the mushroom clouds yourself. You hear about them in hushed conversations. read about them in papers that barely understand what has occurred. 2 cities gone, tens of thousands dead in moments. A new weapon, a new world. Japan surrenders. The war ends. There's celebration in the streets, kisses in Times Square, paper raining from windows like confetti and relief. But there's something else beneath it all. A chill. Because now, mankind knows how to destroy itself. Soldiers return. Not all are whole. Some carry scars you can't see. Others disappear into the swell of suburbia, trying to forget. The GI Bill helps some go to school, buy homes, start lives. The economy booms. America stands tall, powerful, and a little dazed. The war is over, but the tension has just begun. Russia, Stalin, the Iron Curtain. The Cold War is whispering. And this time, the battlefield is everywhere and nowhere. But that's another chapter. For now, the train slows as it leaves the shadows of World War II behind. You exhale not because it's over, but because finally, for a brief moment, the world is quiet. You sit in front of a grainy black and white television screen. It's the early 1950s, and the world outside buzzes with anxiety. You can't escape the looming tension. Nuclear arms, ideological chess matches, and the occasional duck-and-cover drill. Welcome to the Cold War, where nobody actually fights, but everybody's constantly preparing for the end of everything. The Cold War isn't a war in the way you expect. It's not trench warfare or heroic charges. It's a war of shadows, of briefcases and secrets, of satellites and propaganda. You're in an era defined by mutually assured destruction. A phrase that basically means if one side launches a nuke, the other side launches one back and nobody wins. Sleep tight. Your evenings are now colored by the threat of communism. Senator Joseph McCarthy is accusing everyone from Hollywood actors to government clerks of being Soviet spies. One wrongly placed typewriter and boom, you're blacklisted. Careers evaporate. Historians still argue whether McCarthy's paranoia was a protective measure or a full-blown national delusion. Either way, you hold your breath every time your neighbor gets a new radio. Meanwhile, you're building things. Highways, suburbs, televisions. The post-war economic boom is dazzling. You can now eat frozen dinners while watching Leave It to Beaver. There's comfort in sameness. Identical homes, identical lawns, identical fears. But beneath the picket fence perfection, civil rights tensions simmer. Not everyone is welcome in this idealized American dream. You watch as the space race begins. In 1957, the Soviet Union launches Sputnik, a shiny metal grapefruit that makes Americans collectively spill their coffee. The U.S. scrambles to catch up. Schools start teaching more math. NASA is born. Kids fantasize about moon bases, while adults mutter about missile gaps. In the back of your mind, you wonder, is this progress or just polished paranoia? Cuba adds a splash of tropical chaos to your Cold War cocktail. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brings the world as close as it's ever come to full-scale nuclear war. For 13 days, you and everyone else watch TV with bated breath, waiting to see if Florida will still be there tomorrow. Spoiler, it survives. Barely. And while you're busy not dying from nuclear fire, America is quietly starting a war in Vietnam. First advisors, then helicopters, then a full-blown military presence. But that's a problem for later. At the same time, the arts start getting weird. Abstract expressionism, beat poetry, and Elvis Presley all crash onto the scene. You're told that dancing like that will ruin your spine, or your soul, depending on who's judging. But kids dance anyway. The Cold War becomes less about war and more about style. Who can dress sharper, speak better, look cooler on TV? Kennedy debates Nixon in 1960, and for the first time, image matters more than substance. Viewers who listened on the radio thought Nixon won. Those who watched on TV saw a sweaty upper lip and voted for the younger, tanner guy. Then Kennedy's shot in 1963, and the illusion shatters. America grieves like a wounded animal. Historians still debate whether his death altered the trajectory of the Cold War or merely revealed how fragile it all was. Either way, your sense of safety fades. Meanwhile, Berlin's split in half. Walls go up, spies multiply, and James Bond becomes a household name. The CIA stirs up coups in distant countries while the FBI watches civil rights leaders closer than foreign enemies. The message is clear. Trust no one, but act like you do. And so you float through the Cold War years. Always alert, always pretending you're not. Your fridge hums comfortingly, your lawn is trimmed, and your world may end any minute. Sleep well. The flicker of the television screen bathes your face in soft static blue as you lean back into the couch cushions, a can of flat cola resting against your chest. The year is 1981. The air smells like hairspray, Reaganomics, and microwave popcorn. You're in America, and you're about to watch the Cold War do its slow-motion finale number. After the drawn-out emotional tension of the 60s and 70s, the 80s burst in with neon socks and economic conservatism. Ronald Reagan's been sworn in as president, looking like someone's ideal uncle from a commercial about freedom and canned chili. You might think, well, at least it can't get more complicated than this. But oh, it will. Reagan's brand of leadership is part cowboy movie, part economics lecture, with a pinch of Hollywood sparkle. His administration kicks off with bold tax cuts and a promise that a rising tide will lift all boats. That is, if your boat isn't currently capsized. While some Americans ride the wave of deregulation and Wall Street boom, others watch the tide rush past, wallets still dry. Historians still argue whether Reaganomics was a bold new strategy or just a trickle-down fantasy with good branding. And then there's the Cold War, yes, still going. Reagan amps up defense spending like he's preparing for the final level of a Cold War video game. You can almost hear the pixelated soundtrack in the background as he calls the Soviet Union the evil empire, bringing a kind of Star Wars vibe to nuclear brinksmanship. But surprise, it's not all doom and mushroom clouds. Despite the harsh rhetoric, Reagan eventually cozies up to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, who has his own radical ideas, glasnost and perestroika. Basically, transparency, reform, and a bucket of political headaches. Meanwhile, your Walkman is playing Madonna, and MTV is teaching America how to dance. Pop culture explodes like a confetti cannon. Michael Jackson moonwalks into global stardom, while movies like Back to the Future remind everyone that the past and future are equally awkward. But don't let the glitter fool you. The 80s also deliver a darker undercurrent. AIDS emerges as a terrifying and poorly understood epidemic, and the government's early response is, let's just say, less than heroic. Communities rally, activists shout, and silence equals death becomes a haunting rallying cry. And in foreign affairs, America flexes its muscles in Central America, particularly in Nicaragua and El Salvador, backing anti-communist forces in a series of proxy conflicts that blur lines and complicate legacies. The Iran-Contra scandal hits like a political migraine, where arms are sold, funds are diverted, and everyone involved swears they had no idea. Historians still argue whether Reagan was blissfully unaware or just extremely good at playing innocent. You shuffle into the next scene like a dream transition. Hello, 1989. The Berlin Wall doesn't so much fall as it melts in the collective will of people with sledgehammers, songs, and a desperate hunger for freedom. You watch it happen on live TV, probably while finishing a bowl of cereal. That wall coming down feels like a symbol of endings, yes, but also of fresh starts. And as the Soviet Union stumbles into the 90s, bruised and dissolving, you can't help but feel it. Something enormous just changed. The Cold War, which shaped half a century of American life, is over. You survived it. Or rather, you slept through parts of it with one eye open, worried about missiles but distracted by Rubik's Cubes and Top Gun. Remember that whole idea of American supremacy? Well, in the 90s, it seems like that might finally be more than just talk. But we'll get to that after one more refill of your Capri Sun. So now it's the 1990s, and America's strutting onto the world stage like it just won a global talent show. The Cold War's over, the Soviet Union just rage quit, and suddenly democracy is trending. Francis Fukuyama even declares the end of history. Like history is some long-running TV series that finally got canceled after 20 messy seasons. Spoiler, history definitely did not end. At home, it's all boy bands, Beanie Babies, and Bill Clinton playing the saxophone on late-night TV. Clinton enters the White House with a vibe that screams, "Cool dad who knows computers." Except behind the charm is a policy wonk with an uncanny ability to triangulate everything, including public opinion. He talks about a third way in politics, which basically means stealing a little bit from each aisle and hoping no one notices. Economically, things are looking up. The 90s see a tech boom so electric it practically smells like fresh plastic and startup coffee breath. Dot-coms are popping up like mushrooms after a spring rain, and for a hot minute, everyone with a hoodie and a dial-up connection thinks they're the next Steve Jobs. The stock market is riding high, and Alan Greenspan becomes a kind of economic cryptid rarely seen, widely quoted. But just when America's flexing its full economic glow-up, foreign policy drops back in like an ex with unfinished business. Enter the Gulf War starring Saddam Hussein, oil fields, and CNN's 24-hour news cycle. Desert Storm becomes the first war that feels like a live-streamed event, with precision bombs and patriotic montages set to swelling orchestras. It's war as spectacle, war as branding, and let's not forget, this was the beginning of America realizing that military dominance also makes for good cable ratings. Meanwhile, the internet is being born, slowly, awkwardly, like a baby giraffe learning to walk on AOL Instant Messenger. Gen X starts emailing chain letters, and Gen Z isn't even a thought yet. Google doesn't exist. Facebook isn't even a bad idea. But somewhere, in a garage lit by the hum of CRT monitors, the seeds of the next revolution are being planted. And just as America's feeling itself again, Clinton gets impeached for a scandal involving a blue dress, a saxophone-loving president, and way too much daytime TV coverage. It's messy, it's meme-worthy, and it reminds everyone that no matter how good the economy is, politics can always find a way to feel like a high school drama club rehearsal gone wrong. But before the credits roll on the decade, Y2K looms like a digital apocalypse. People start hoarding canned goods and water like the computers are going to become self-aware and delete civilization at midnight. Spoiler again, nothing happens. Your Tamagotchi survives. So do you. As the calendar flips to the year 2000, there's this brief, sparkling moment of optimism. History didn't end. It just changed costumes again. America is still the main character. But the next plot twist? Oh, it's already loading. It's the year 2000. Everything smells like optimism and new millennium air freshener. People are dancing in silver pants. Napster is ruining the music industry one illegal download at a time. And the worst thing on your mind is which ringtone to assign to your crush. Life feels light. That is, until everything gets very, very dark. September 11th, 2001. For planes, thousands of lives. And a day that punches America in the soul. You're watching it unfold live, maybe with a Pop-Tart in hand, and nothing makes sense. The Twin Towers collapse like sandcastles kicked by invisible feet, and the world freezes. The skies go silent. The fear isn't just in airports, it's in classrooms, coffee shops, living rooms. Everything after this moment is before and after.
George W. Bush.
The president who once seemed like the guy you'd call to fix your barbecue grill now finds himself cast in a role no one rehearsed for. His approval ratings skyrocket because grief needs a leader, even if that leader squints a lot and mispronounces nuclear. And so begins the war on terror. First stop, Afghanistan. The Taliban had hosted Osama bin Laden, and the U.S. decides it's time for a full send. Bombs fall, soldiers land, and suddenly America is in a war that will stretch on for 20 years. Longer than some of the soldiers fighting it have even been alive. In 2003, Bush levels up the campaign with Iraq. The reason? Weapons of mass destruction. They're never found. But the invasion goes forward anyway, toppling Saddam Hussein and setting off a cascade of chaos, insurgencies, and endless debate over why any of it happened. Mission accomplished gets printed on a banner before the real mission even begins. At home, everything changes. The Patriot Act passes faster than you can Google it, and suddenly your emails have more eyes on them than your MySpace page. Airport security becomes a full-body experience, and Orange Alert becomes the new background noise of daily life. Culturally, America copes the way it always does, through media. 24 puts terrorism on a countdown clock. Green Day writes a rock opera about political disillusionment. And somewhere, a young Mark Zuckerberg is building a social network that'll turn your awkward high school friend into a conspiracy theory influencer. And yet, in the background of all this intensity, life goes on. People keep texting in T9, kids obsess over Harry Potter, and the iPod becomes everyone's new best friend. There's a strange duality. Grief and growth, fear and freedom, reality TV and real war all happening at once. As the 2000s roll toward the 2010s, there's a sense that the world got faster, louder, and more complicated, but also more connected. You're no longer just a citizen of your country. You're online. You're global. You're about to follow history in real time, 140 characters at a time.